Good morning, Dachi.
Good morning, Nick. How you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Yeah. We're here for a Sunday morning live chat about favourite brands. This is a request from a previous listener who was pretty curious about what sort of brands we like, why we like them, and maybe we'll talk a bit more about what is really in a brand these days.
Right.
Would you like to kick off, Dachi? And don't say Primark.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, in terms of favorite brands, I mean, they've definitely changed in part over time, but there are brands that, and when I say over time, it's sort of like in the last 15, 20 years or something like that.
That's a
But
long time.
it is, isn't it? I'm getting old, Nick. I'm catching up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess there's a thing about what is it that we like with certain brands and how have they sort of developed over time as well. So like a good example of a brand that I've really been into, which won't be any secret, is Tender. That's something that I've been into for, well, probably kind of shockingly best part of a decade now, I think.
Has it really been going that long?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think back now. I mean, that it must be, well, if not 10 years, then close to it, So yeah, it must be that long, really.
It always strikes me that he has not a very good brand name.
Yeah, in terms of searching for it, you mean?
You sort of think about the sort of tender loving care and so forth, but it's not really named after that. It's named after the tender on a steam train who puts the coal in, which is an entirely different proposition.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, I mean, yeah, so if you try to search for it, a lot of people have started using Tender Co., which makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
And actually, I remember the first time I saw it as well. I think it was in Pegs and Sons, my local shop, that again, like years ago. And I remember looking at it going like, what a strange brand. Like, I just didn't get it at all, but that's exactly what sort of drew me to it, I think.
And as far as I can tell, it hasn't really changed that much over time either.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, so I think the reason I start with Tender as well is because I think it'll sort of show the sorts of things, or emphasize the sorts of things that I'm really into. And one of those things is, I think what William does is he sort of, every year he does like some weird experimentation. And I think he's more into the process of making something without necessarily always knowing exactly what the outcome will be. And that sort of process of, I'll have a go as a sort of a mad scientist type thing at doing this interesting production method, and then I'll end up with something that I can't quite predict, but I'm sure it'll be interesting. That's kind of an interesting thing, and over time I think he's refined a lot of his approaches. So again, I think he, in terms of the weaves that he uses, he's been experimenting a lot. There's a bunch of sort of different variations of denim that he's used, and obviously the other aspect that I really like about his stuff is the natural dyes. And to be honest, that was one of the things that really drew me in. Is the first time I remember is I saw a turmeric shirt, and the color of that, and it's just like, that looks so different and distinct to, your synthetic dyes.
Very
and that really drew me in.
Subdued, yellowy,
curry
color, really.
Exactly, like a good takeaway. It drew me in
because that really is William's thing. It's a constant evolution of fabrics, dyes, cuts, because there's always some weird butterfly shirt, but still the sort of overall silhouette and expression is definitely compatible over the seasons and years. It's not like he's sort of reinventing everything and following a fashion or anything. He's definitely in his own mind.
Yeah, so those sort of like evergreen sort of products that, he hasn't like, he'll do a work.
You missed out for a few seconds there. You said he'd do.
Sorry, so he'll do a workwear inspired jacket, but it won't be like a literal one-for-one traditional workwear jacket. And because of that, I think that means that, it's his product and it looks a certain way and it's never relevant or irrelevant. It's sort of a timeless design by him for people that like his stuff.
Yeah.
And I quite like brands that do that because, there's something about when you go into heritage garments. First of all, they're not cheap and you're not buying it because they're cheap. You want something that's of value over a long time and that's of good quality. And so something that, again, you don't want it to be hip and cool now and then exactly for that reason be out of style.
Yeah.
And then, you won't wear it. So yeah, exactly. Like that I think Williams' brand is a good example of the sorts of things that I really appreciate. And the other thing about his approach as well is like it doesn't go through any committee. It's most likely just him and maybe one or two other people around him. Yeah. And whatever vision he has, better or for worse, that's the product that you get, which is, again, really interesting.
Because I think Tender Company is just him and his wife, and the factory that makes most of his clothes is a husband and wife factory. So we're not talking huge production or huge companies or anything here.
And he works with mills in Japan.
Yeah, Tender does have its very loyal fans, though, doesn't it? You either get it or you sort of really don't.
Yeah, I think, and that's right. And you know what? That's kind of an interesting thing as well because in today's world, there's space for brands like that. Whereas 20 years ago or whatever, that would have been a hard thing to do unless it was a very niche sort of maybe t-shirt based brand or something. But to have a production at that sort of scale is now manageable because there are people out there that will find it and are willing to pay their sort of fair price for a product like his. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's definitely not, when I have friends that sort of realize that I'm into clothes or something and they want some advice, as much as I love Tender, it wouldn't be the first brand that I would suggest to them. It's that I realize that you sort of, there's a few steps before you get to that level of.
That is always very tricky. Once you've gone down a few rabbit holes of interests, and sort of divined your own special interests, and someone asks you, well, what would you recommend? Well, yeah, I'm sort of interested in clothes, but sort of not clothes, if you get the meaning. It's quite a sort of different thing without wanting to sound like a real wanker. But
and then there's aspects of it because you realize that the things that you and I might value, which is like it ages nicely, it has an unusual silhouette, all those things that you might be into, or it references certain historical garments, they're not necessarily things that appeal to sort of someone that's just starting out. Maybe, the references are sort of irrelevant for someone that doesn't appreciate the reference. The something like a natural dye is just annoying because I bought this yellow turmeric shirt and now it's faded. So they're not really pluses, and that's probably why the big brands will most likely never do the sorts of products that smaller brands can do, because you don't have that direct sort of communication or understanding between customer and the maker. But having said that, you have started seeing bigger brands do natural dyes now, and people have sort of started to understand the benefits of it to some extent. But part of me does wonder, is it like this couple of seasons it'll last and then it'll sort of fade away again?
It's sort of in the nature of things, isn't it? Because the larger brands are fashion brands. That's the reason why they do things in season, because every season they want you to come and buy something new. And if natural dyes is what it takes for you to come in with your wallet this season, well, that's what they'll do. Cynical, but that is sort of the way they work.
Yeah.
I was going to mention Companion Denim. Not a very well-known denim brand. It must have been going now for 8 years or so. Started out as a one-man factory in just outside Barcelona. I visited him, was it 4 years ago, 3 years ago? Huge selection of vintage machines, which is of course obligatory for anyone seriously into making denim. You can't use new machines, which might work better. be more efficient, and don't break down as often. You have to have a huge selection of really ancient machines that cause you no end of hassle, but you can sort of, they look good on photos. But I had a wonderful visit there, and he's made me 3 pairs of jeans now. Not inexpensive, sort of around the 300 mark. But then they're made to my measure with the denim I wanted and the fit I wanted. So they are extremely nice jeans, and well worth checking out. As we mentioned in our previous chat, there are a horrendous amount of denim companies out there now, all vying for pretty much the same sort of customer, all offering pretty much the same variations over a very narrow product. And it's strange you should mention it, because I see Tom just popped in here, and he of course has a British denim brand, United Overalls, which has the unique selling point of being made with British denim. Which,
seen that. That's quite exciting.
British brand, British denim, made in Britain, which is a kind of unique selling point there. A selling point that a lot of other brands don't really have.
So what actually drew you to Companion Denim, though? I guess, like, how did you hear about it, when then sort of why did you stick around, if that makes sense?
I have a feeling I might have discovered it on Instagram, or else it was a time when I might have been going down some sort of forum rabbit hole or something and discovered it that way. I just can't remember really, but there was a period when denim brands were, I mean, they were sort of extra super special if they were a one-man brand. But I think what really drew me to Companion was just the sheer dedication to quality and construction that he does. I mean, all the legs are felled seams, there's no overlocking. It's just completely without compromise, which of course is a major selling point for me.
Absolutely.
I just love it when things are done not only as good as they can be, but perhaps just a little bit better than that as well.
Yeah, sort of unnecessarily better, but it gives you that satisfaction knowing that it is that bit better.
It does, because when I look at something that people are going on about, oh, this is so good, this is excellent, I fell out with a guy because there was an American one-man brand, and this guy was showing me his new jeans, and I was looking at the overlocked seams in the legs, and I was thinking, this isn't as good as they're trying to make out. And they were going, oh, but he's the best, it's immense.
Yeah.
Nah, not really, that could have been better. And I've never heard from him since.
It's funny, overlock stitch, I know there's a lot of debate with the sort of denim nerds whether it is worse or not. I mean, for me, I think there's a durability argument, and then there's sort of visual effort argument. And I think a lot of people will argue the sort of, but it's possibly more durable, and there's all these debates about that. For me, it's more about, like, visually, I just prefer the look of something that isn't overlocked and is felt seam, because it's neater, and I know that it's more effort. And having said that, depending on the weight of the denim, it might not be appropriate to do felled seams, right? Because you just get like some. So there's a trade-off there. But it's, again, this is an example of one of the many things that someone can do to show that they've gone through that additional effort, that they haven't just cut corners or made something that looks like everything else, but actually isn't as nice or good.
That's a good summary, because that's exactly how I feel about it. Overlocks are the sort of, I mean, they have their place on other fabrics, but on a pair of jeans, it's the cheap and easy solution. Felled means you've done it properly, and of course it does look that much better. It's like when you're into selvage denim, this is another sort of point where I'll seem like quite a wanker. When you're into selvage denim and you wear your cuffs turned up and you show off your little selvage thing, and then you see someone else who have turned up their jeans and it's not selvage, it's just an overlocked edge, and you sort of think, ooh. And then you realise that you're the guy with the problem. But there you go.
But so it's because it then comes back to me because of that thing where I still think it's, if you like it, wear it however the hell you want. It does not matter in the least. I think actually in some ways the selvage thing is worse if you have like a really cheap pair of jeans that then try to pretend that they're somehow of a higher quality just because they're stuck on a cheap salvage fabric, or in the worst case, they've actually put on the sort of a tape at the end of it that looks like salvage but it's not, which some companies have done. That's 100 times worse than something that's just overlocked. I mean, depending on the denim, it could be 10 times more interesting to have an interesting pair of overlocked denim. I mean, so Tender, to be a good example of that, Tender has overlocks stitches on some of their jeans, and again, it's because if you have a 20-ounce pair of super duper dyed denim, then it just makes sense to overlock it in that case, rather than have 40 ounces of felt seams on top of each other. What about denim though? Because I guess the companion denim offers really sort of unique versions of denim. So what sort of stuff have you sort of gone for there?
I have a pair which, it's indigo and persimmon dyed. So there is.
What color is persimmon?
It's a reddish brown. So there are sort of lovely, almost purple color on the outside, but brown on the inside, and it's a completely unique fabric.
Yeah.
Sadly, as things go, I put on a little bit of weight since I got them, so I haven't really been able to use them much. But I will get there again. So
this is a pre-commitment device. You buy a tight pair of jeans. That's your target. You got to get back to it, because otherwise it's a waste. So it's committing you, Nick. It's a good thing.
Well, you have all these guys telling you that you should buy your jeans just a little bit too short because they'll expand in the waist and so forth. Has that ever happened? And how many years of commitment do you have to put into it?
If you wear a corset, I find it's comfortable, so it's fine.
Because I find that so painful, and then you have the thing, you buy your shoes a size or half a size too small, because then they will sort of adapt to your feet and become the best ever, and you're sort of wondering 6 months in that, was this the right choice?
Yeah.
Well, you hobble around.
Yeah.
Some of these things, they demand so much dedication. It's truly horrible.
And that's another example of why we wouldn't recommend it as a sort of your mate just got into it, and then you tell them, this is what you do. You spend loads of money on something that you won't appreciate for the first 6 months. Then it might start feeling comfortable, and eventually you might understand why it is better than some other brands. So that's the brand that you should go for. You don't start out with that recommendation. You start out with, why don't you try a pair of Uniqlo, salvage denim? They're great value for money,
And then they have to spend all their free time debating in the echo chamber of some forum about why this was the best choice.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's probably a whole different discussion altogether. Again, there's that we've sort of touched on in the previous conversation as well, but sort of the one-upsmanship and the sort of very linear view of, good, better, best. Okay, best.
Yeah.
The only thing that's acceptable now, and we all agree on the best. And if you put anything up that isn't in that little category, then you'll be ignored. But if you put something in that category, then loads of feedback. Good choice. We're with you.
Yeah.
What are some of the other brands, I guess, you've sort of been into?
Well, I did bring something out for the show and tell today, which is one of my favourite jackets.
Yeah.
It's a Mr. Freedom Mulholland Master. It's a jacket I was after for years and years. This one was originally made 10 years ago and has not been remade in that colour. So when I finally found one, I had to pounce on it. But it did take me best part of 10 years to find it. Luckily, this was an immaculate one. But Mr. Freedom is a brand based in LA. It's the designer, Christophe, is French. So it's a Frenchman in LA, where most of the things are made in Japan. Again, definitely not a cheap brand, but I don't think they're making a huge amount of money on it. But again, it's small numbers made. And either I think you understand what he's trying to do or you sort of don't. because if you don't understand it, it looks like he's making a lot of clothes for dressing up, maybe.
Right.
Cosplay.
Mm.
But he does a wonderful blog where he goes through all the influences and how each design has been sort of thought out, which is worth reading just for enjoyment, really.
Yeah. And they're really stuff. Like, it's like a book.
Lots of historical documentation and so forth, and then he sort of ends up with these garments that are very enduring. I have a huge preference for his jackets. They're definitely the best value. I find that trousers and shirts and so forth tend to not getting as much for your money there. And the jackets are definitely where the most work has gone into them. But I have a few of his jackets now, and they're definitely in the sort of core collection, if I can say that with a straight face.
The ones that won't move anytime soon.
But hard to find in Europe, really. I know Pegs and Son, your local dealer, had some for a while. Clutch Cafe in London has some. Maritime Antiques in Copenhagen, but they tend to take a very small part of each collection and seldom really choose the good bits, I find.
It's difficult with that because you sort of want to see the range, don't you? Because it's sort of, he has the overall brand, but he almost has sub brands, doesn't he? He sort of has like lines that are very distinct.
Well, each season is a whole new idea. So this jacket was from a collection which was influenced by motorcyclists in LA in the 50s. I have another collection I like a lot, which is Saigon Cowboy, off-duty during the Vietnam War, with sort of military camouflage-inspired reinterpretations of jackets from around that time, which is also really good. Another collection might be, I think there was one called Sea Hunter, which was sort of Hawaii diving inspired. So, and all these collections, of course, completely independent of any fashion ideas floating around at the time. It's just that he's probably seen a film or something and then sort of fixated on this period and thought, yeah, we'll do something about that. And then goes down that rabbit hole.
So this jacket, just when I look at it, so I mean, it looks like a Barber International sort of traditional Belstaff.
It looks like the Belstaff, the Barber International from around that time. It's got definitely the same fabric, similar fabric, I'd say, because this is a really thick fabric. It's a heavy jacket, but it's got the pocket of the trial master where it's sort of skewed a bit so you can get your documents out. The thing about it, though, it's just so immensely well made. And you compare this to, say, a Belstaff or a Barber of the time, and it makes them look like sort of toy jackets. Mm-hmm. The entire lining is in corduroy.
Wow.
And that belt buckle is in solid brass. So it's just, you can just imagine sitting there, how can we make this better? Well, let's do this. How can we make it more difficult to make? And you've even got this part here is leather. So it's just immense. Maybe I should do a blog post about it full of really porny close-up photos.
Details. Yeah. Because I was going to say, like, for example, the corduroy, or the original, at least the one I have, I think it's like, what is it? The sort of collar has a bit of corduroy, and the sleeves has a bit of corduroy. Yeah. And that's quite nice. But so that's a whole sort of layer of corduroy underneath that.
All inside.
Right. So that's like effectively an extra jacket, isn't it? So it's effectively like two jackets that you're sort of getting there.
Sort of an Inception jacket.
Right. Yeah.
So
can you do that thing and sort of turn it inside out and wear it with the corduroy side? You probably get all the wax on you.
Well, there's actually no wax on it. It's not supplied in the waxed form, so I haven't had the heart to wax it. But I do have one of his deck jackets as well, which I hadn't really noticed until he showed a photo on his Instagram where he'd waxed it, and I was thinking, wow, that looks great. So I've got the jacket, I've got the wax. I haven't had the heart to do it.
I remember because I tried. I mean, so Ilka, he waxed this jacket and made it look like it was that easy. And a couple of years before that, I tried to do it with my barber, and I hated the process. I just it bled through every bit of the jacket, then got onto the table, and now it's just wax everywhere. So if anyone's going to try it at home, just watch a few videos and be a bit more careful than I was, because I just ended up with a lot of wax everywhere but the jacket. So
yeah, it is definitely something you have to trial and error and learn from, but it's not tricky. You do have various different waxes, though. I mean, using the Barber Thornproof dressing is really very easy, because it is basically already flowing. You just need to heat it up a bit more, and you can put it on. But you really want to do it in a very warm place as well, because unless your jacket that you're applying it to is also very warm, the minute it touches the surface, it's solid. But you can use, I mean, you have wax in bar form, etc., which is easier to use. Could be easy to use, where you just sort of rub it on. I found the problem with
dry sort of straight on onto the jacket type process. Yeah.
I did do an entire jacket in the Fjällräven wax, but I think I was using too much heat on that, because I think the wax was just evaporating as I was applying it. So I ended up with no wax left and not much on the jacket either. It's kind of strange.
I just saw Ilka's just posted a laughing face at me, so I guess he remembers my failure as well. But I guess it's like, there are companies that will do this. So if you have a nice Falstaff or barber jacket, I would recommend just sending it back to the factory, and they can actually do it for a relatively sensible price, from what I remember.
As I've heard now, I think they actually aren't waxing jackets at the moment.
Oh, are they not?
But you do have the Malin guy, Malin and Son. He appears to corner the market in waxing jackets. Okay. The thing is, the guys who do it professionally, they don't actually charge much. Once you've invested £10-15 in the wax and sort of got yourself all rigged up, I think it's about £50 to have someone actually do the whole job for you, wax included. So no one's making their fortune there.
There isn't okay.
But it is kind of cool to be able to do stuff like this yourself.
Oh, so I just saw Ilka just said, Filson wax is easy to apply as well. So that's another shortcut, apparently.
I have some of that in my collection of waxes that I will someday get to.
That's not bad.
But
right.
I always have about 2,000 plans that are just waiting for me to
graveyard plans. Yeah, I'm the same. I mean, the amount of buttons that I've collected in vintage shops that I've gone, I'm gonna put that button on that jacket because it's gonna look perfect, and then it only takes 2 minutes to put it on. But 5 years later, I haven't gotten.
You can also do it while watching telly, so there's really no excuse.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
So
I'm just thinking okay. Well, so I was gonna say, I seem to be noticing a bit of a, what should we call it, a sort of a thread through the brands that we like. We didn't really coordinate on this before, but it sounds like one man sort of brands, or brands that are sort of very much a product of one person's vision, seems to be so far the thing that we're into. And then the other aspect that I'm picking up is the quality of production, and maybe sort of some unusual attention to quality in general is the other thing we're both appreciate.
Well, there's an interesting parallel to that, the one-man design, because cars used to be designed primarily by one person. So you talk about the great vintage or classic cars and so forth, and often there'll be one person credited with the design there.
Yeah.
But at some point during, I think it must have been during the late 80s, you started getting the design by committee type.
Yeah.
And things became a lot blander, because you won't get that clarity of vision, that unique idea, the quirkiness, when you're asking 20 people for their input.
Yeah.
But you have one guy who's really good, and he'll make something really special.
Yeah.
So I think there is a definite parallel there.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I guess maybe that's maybe one of the things is, when you have a design by committee approach, you probably makes generally a product that appeals to more people more broadly, but probably, you know, doesn't give anyone that sense of like something that's really unique and special, and therefore doesn't really connect to those few people that on a sort of really deep level.
I think you might not even be talking about appeals more broadly, but rather offends less.
Offends less. That's probably a better way
So,
of putting it. Yeah.
is anyone offended by this car? No. Well, that's good then.
No,
Just
it's
because everyone
generic.
like it.
Yeah. So I guess I can give another brand that sort of is in the sort of same stream, but sort of slightly different as well. It's called Older Brother. So I don't know if you know that brand, but it's an American brand, and they mainly focus on using natural dyes. And so it's sort of very plainly cut, sort of classic t-shirts, sweatshirts, jeans. And then what they do is they use natural dyes in all sorts of forms. So I have a couple of items from them that I really like. One of them is sort of a saffron dyed pair of trousers. I've put that on my feet as well. So, you know, that must have been a hell of a process to make those. And again,
it's really expensive, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is like, you know, when I first saw it, I was like, how much saffron do you have to use to, you know, make a pair of? But that it was when I bought it, I think just around 150. So, you know, made in the US for, you know, natural dyed garment from a relatively small brand. Really good value, actually.
Did you get it direct?
I didn't. No, I got it from my local shop called Our Daily Edit. So it's through a retailer.
Yeah. So it has been through the markups and so forth. So
Yeah.
It sounds very reasonable.
Yeah. And you can definitely buy it directly as well. Although, you know, when it's an American brand in Europe, it's always difficult because sometimes, you know, when you import it, it'll end up costing you even more than you would from buying from a retailer locally. So, but no, it's a really interesting brand because I guess it's another angle to this sort of what we think about when it comes to quality, because it doesn't necessarily make things with, you know, vintage fabrics or with you know, union machines or any of that sort of stuff. It's more modern production, and they probably can deliver value because of that, because they can make sort of cut and make jeans and they're sort of using the best techniques, sort of modern approaches. And then the thing that they sort of then focus on is a tedious way of dyeing the garments. So, you know, it's another way of producing something I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. I'd never even heard of the brand.
There you go. I just gave you a bit of something to look into.
Yeah, I also feel really, really sort of put out now because I also like to think of myself as knowing pretty much everything.
Well, this is the thing. So I'm actually quite proud that I managed to spot something that you haven't yet.
Yeah. I'm trying to think who I might mention next. I mean, I could mention Nigel Cabourn because he is sort of pretty much everywhere. But he's a good example of a brand where I like something he made a lot, but I think he hasn't made much that is great. And he was very much, he sort of had a period when he peaked and has not really made anything interesting for me before that, and really not made anything after. But in 2003, he did his Ascent of Cabourn collection, which was really super inspired and gave us the cameraman jacket, the Mallory jacket, the Everest jacket, the most overpriced down jacket ever shown to man, and so forth. But and it was as if suddenly all this inspiration came, and there was a really cool marketing campaign behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, there were some years where sort of trying to make more stuff along the same vein, and then it's just sort of not really been that great since. Mm-hmm. Which is a shame because, I mean, if you could have kept up that incredible inspiration there was for a brief period there, it would have been immense. And sadly, as the inspiration died out, the price sort of just kept shooting upwards. So it's an example of a brand where everything was right and then everything sort of kind of went wrong.
So when you, because I mean, I guess one of the things with his brand is, you know, the classic stuff. It comes, you know, the sort of the cameraman jacket, and there's a few other of those that you sort of would sort of usually associate with his lines. They sort of come out every year. And so do you think it's something about, you know, he sort of got those classic, or his sort of take on things right the first time, and he's ever since just been producing variations of the same thing?
There
Or
has been every season since there have been variations of it. Some good, some not so good, some terrible. But you can still also get the sort of original ones. So it's quite clear that they are very, very aware of what people really like in the range, because you can still get the Mallory jacket in 5 different versions, I think, at the moment. So, but a lot of the other stuff is, yeah, you sort of wonder. Lots of collaborations as well, which seem oddly ill-advised with brands that don't really seem to be working for him. But I mean, they're selling a bunch of stuff, so I might be the person here who has the oddly out of tune interpretation of it.
yeah, I mean, there's something about, you know, I guess if you like a certain brand and you sort of have an understanding of their products, and maybe over time as it gets bigger and starts doing slightly different things, you know, I guess that's not unusual for a brand to just start maybe not connecting with you as much because it's doing something slightly different. And I guess you still want to hold on to the image that you originally sort of fell in love with or sort of connected to. So no, I've definitely had that with some brands where it's sort of, yeah, or maybe I also changed over time as well. So yeah, I guess it's hard to always know where that sort of things have sort of changed. Yeah.
Well, that is a valid point, because in my teens I always used to wear white high top Nike basketball boots, and I was pretty much sure that was forever.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about them in 35 years, so I think I changed there.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably was into, well, yeah, certainly a bunch of things I'm not into anymore. I mean, FUBU, I don't know if you remember that, but that was there's a, you know, sort of skater clothing and sort of that sort of stuff in the 90s. I was into that quite a bit. I wouldn't immediately jump to it now, but you know, it was sort of the Fresh Prince era and all that stuff, and I was pretty sure that was forever. But yeah, so.
Yeah. But then again, a lot of these brands, I mean, they do change the designers, they change their seasonal fashion things and stuff. So really, it might be the same brand name, but really the content has changed so widely from season to season that even if you were into them before, there's no one around who made that stuff any longer anyway. So there's really nothing apart from the label on the back that you might still recognize.
I guess there's also something about, if it's again like something like his stuff where he might get bored of the stuff that he produced eventually, right? So he might want to just branch out and do other things. I mean, because I can see myself, if I was a designer and just thinking, you know, I've gotten 1 or 2 things right, but I just want to keep experimenting, coming up with stuff, and you know, I want that freedom to be able to do that. It must be kind of difficult to maybe just have people who just expect you to go down the same sort of stream of thought every single season. But that's why something like Mr. Freedom is interesting, because he sort of sets out very explicitly what his inspiration is and then goes from there every season. Or someone like William is really interesting because he's just into the real sort of production end of it, and you know, he'll just focus on that bit of it, and every year there'll be a new experiment going on, and the design will be another sort of weird idea that he just wants to test out. And then some of them are really practical and awesome garments that I love, and then there are other things, even with his stuff, where I'm like, I like it, but I'm not sure it's something that I want to sort of invest in, because I'm not sure that I get much use of it. So, you know, just depends.
At the end of the day, really, the stuff you get most use of is the stuff that isn't sort of that peacocky or...
Speak for yourself, Nick.
Well,
some of us might be copying around, actually.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, sort of, as opposed to brands that sort of reinvent themselves every season, you've got a brand like Universal Works, who keep making the Baker jacket
Yeah.
every season in just different fabrics.
Yeah.
So if you liked it 2 years ago, you can get one this year in an updated fabric, and it's really just the same jacket.
Yeah. Or like engineered garments, like the Bedford jacket, you know, like I think they've been producing that for I don't know how long as well. You know, there's things like that where it's just like, which is really nice because, you know that once you wear your one out, you know, there'll never be the replacement for it. That's just as good.
Whenever I look at engineered garments, I always sort of think, now, why on earth were they called engineered garments? Because there's this story about them showing some early garments to someone, and they said, "Oh, this is engineered."
Yeah.
But if you look at them, they're just made like everything else. So there's no reason for that
How
story
dare
at all.
you? How dare you, Nick? Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, I'll be getting death threats now.
Engineered garments, they have their fans, they'll be after you. You gotta watch out on Instagram now. But still, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I mean, it's well-made stuff, but yeah, I'm not sort of like blown away as, you know, some other garments. Like, if Mr. Freedom was called engineered garments, that would maybe make more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, in some ways, at least some of the stuff. But I was really disappointed by the recent Engineered Garments Barber collaboration, which I thought, wow, now that sounds like it has good potential. Because I was thinking of the previous Taquito collaboration, which produced some immensely good stuff. But then the Engineered Garments version came, and yeah, it wasn't really that cool.
Yeah.
I mean, the Taquito jackets, they're still super sought after and could go for probably twice what they originally cost still.
Yeah.
So that was really inspired. But,
was it basically Barber stuff with sort of slight twists, or was it more engineered garments with a slight twist?
It was more slight twist to Barber, I think.
Okay.
So, I mean, they hadn't taken it far enough.
Yeah.
If you didn't know that it was engineered garments, you'd probably just have thought, that's slightly unusual Barber, but
yeah.
But the Taquito stuff was, I mean, it was a lot of fishing jackets and lots of things to put your salmon flies on, and there were all sorts of variants, and it's just really fun. You can even prance in it if you like.
Because like
new salmon flies every day.
That's exactly what you need. You need more prancing gear. And so it's funny because I mean the Watanabe stuff with Barber I've seen, and that's really cool. And I think in general, I think there's this may again, like that's another topic, but there's an issue with collaborations where you sort of want 50-50, don't you? Ideally, but it mostly ends up being sort of 90-10 in my experience.
I think that's the problem. You sort of sense that the actual collaboration was more co-branding than an actual exchange of ideas and creativity. Exactly. And you sort of wonder what each party really wanted to get out of it, because what you end up seeing is often really rather uninspired.
Yeah. Really vanilla, and just the slight tweak.
So it's sort of, why did you put his name on it? This is something you'd have made anyway. So, but then again, you sort of get that hype beast thing with all the sneaker collaborations and all this, where you can tell that to really get people gagging for it, you have to have some famous rapper or something who's selected the colours for this version or whatever.
Yeah.
I won't say that sneakers is something I invest a huge amount of time in researching, but that's my impression anyway.
No, that's
prejudiced.
My impression as well, definitely. Yeah. No, definitely.
Any last brand you'd like to mention?
I guess I sort of put together a short list in my head, and I guess I have two more.
Okay.
So one which I bring up all the time on my feed, I won't spend too much time on, but Dawson Denim is one of my favorite brands. Again, that's sort of a heritage inspired, but again, the thing that I like about it is that it has a very unusual sort of contemporary twist to it. It's not just a reproduction brand. And in terms of all the values, in terms of, quality of production, it being local to me in particular, but also like the fabrics they use, all those things. Something
I love their imagery. They do really good shots, and I love their wide leg trousers. And I'd love to get a pair of those in the 19-ounce denim. But
19 I think they'd have an 18-ounce, but not probably in the wide leg. Yeah, they don't really do the super heavy, or it's not 19 ounces isn't super heavy, I guess, but it's like
No.
I don't think they go above 14 really yet, but maybe that's something that, but if you like the imagery, Nick, you need to come down to Brighton. That's where it's all taken.
Yeah.
You
Well,
need to go around.
I'd need the regular guys walking around in their wide leg trousers to sort of get it really right.
Right. Yeah.
But I can see how the local aspect and that makes it special for you. Yeah.
Yeah, because actually the first time that I saw it, they used to just make aprons, and it was in Pegs and Sons, and I thought, imagine if I could buy a pair of jeans that was made in Brighton. That would be incredible. But I thought, when is that going to happen? Because all they have is aprons. I mean, to jump from aprons to trousers is quite a leap in production.
Quite a leap, yeah.
So I thought that was never going to happen. But actually, that was originally always their plan, apparently. So a couple of years later, when I saw it, I was obviously very excited. And like I told you last time, I went all the way to Germany to get my first jacket from them. So that was a bit of an experience. So the other brand that I really like as well, that I was going to mention, is Workshop England. I don't know if you know about that. Ooh, have I just mentioned another brand that you don't know, Nick? This is exciting.
I think they were on my radar, say 3 years ago.
Oh,
kind of low profile though, and I think they mainly sort of aim towards Japan.
Yes, and I think they have a different name there. Hackney Union is the name that they use there. But again, so it's a really interesting brand. The references are more sort of Victorian work wear, a bit more sort of stylized, and also some of the stuff is very sort of unusual cuts, things that don't necessarily sort of immediately sort of look Victorian at all, actually. So they sort of have two aspects to them. Some of it which looks quite classical, sort of Victorian almost, and then other stuff that's like really sort of unusual. But it's a really interesting brand again, because it's from what I understand, one or two people, it's one guy designing it, and then they just cut out there.
Yep, one guy designing it.
So one person designing it. He has one cutter, and I think they're all sort of produced within the one shop otherwise. So quite an interesting sort of take on things, and the sorts of things that we probably care about. Again, with heritage, it sort of ticks those boxes for me. But it's one of those things where I think in terms of the style and things, we always talk about this, don't we? Where I like to mix brands. I'm not particularly into wearing one brand in its full, because I often find that, especially with workwear, that can look quite costumey at times, or at least for me, the way I like to wear things. So, I mean, that's maybe an interesting thing to sort of end on, is as much as I have these brands that I really enjoy and love, I probably wouldn't wear a whole outfit by any particular brand alone, because I find that it doesn't quite reflect that, I guess.
That can be a bit problematic. I have this enduring image in my mind from when I used to hang on the forums. There was a guy in America who used to dress completely in post overalls, which makes you look like you were working the trains in 1920 or something.
Yeah.
So he had this, and then he also had this sort of Amish style beard.
Nothing wrong with that, Nick. Nothing wrong with that.
I mean, it's reenactment or cosplay or something. Totally buying into it, but I couldn't do that. I live in a small town.
Yeah. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, that's maybe another conversation for the future. But that thing where I do think there's there's a bit where you want to fall back on the classic silhouettes and looks and combinations. But I mean, personally, I also like just mixing up a little bit, and I never want to look like I've come out of someone's lookbook, if that makes sense. And I also don't want to look like the mocks and socks guy every day. I'm nothing wrong with mocks and socks. I've worn both of those items, but I think there's a bit where I think in general in the heritage world there is a bit of a risk of people always looking either the same or very similar to each other, and so I think that's one thing for me where being committed to any one brand in its entirety just don't takes away a lot of options to sort of, I guess, in a wanky way, express yourself and all those things. But
I think you realise you have a. I think you realise you have a problem when you sort of get up in the morning, you check what day it is, which hashtags are relevant today. Let's see, it's Wednesday, so it's Red Wings and whatever.
Yeah. Salvage Sunday and everything. I mean, to me, it's salvage every day, Nick. That's what I say.
Yeah, pretty much, apart from when I'm not worried.
That's a new hashtag then.
I'll let you in on a secret. I bought a pair of trousers last Saturday, and I've been wearing them every day since.
Trousers or denim?
Well, they are actually in Universal Works Kyoto denim Japanese cut pants. Super comfy and really different, but it was actually the denim that I noticed. I thought, wow, that's cool. So I'm still not so blasé that I'm not swayed by seeing something in a shop. So there you go.
Oh, I need to see a picture of that. So if you've been impressed by a pair of denim, that must be pretty special.
Yeah, well, they're not salvage, and they're Universal Works, but really
That's
different.
it. You've been cancelled on Instagram. That's it. Can't be part of this conversation any longer. They're not salvage, Nick. Oh my god.
Oh yeah. And on that shocking note, I think it's about time for us to call it a day.
Cool.
It's been a great chat, Dachi, and I'll catch up with you again soon.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers,
Bye.
Nick. Bye.